face of overwhelming odds, I'm left with only one option. I'm gonna have to science the shit out of this.
Well, I never imagined when I sat down and wrote a series of blog posts for a bunch of hardcore dorks that I would be in a situation like this. But here I am. So we've got a lot of stuff to get through today. So rather than yammer on for a long time, we'll just move along. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to look at this piece of paper because I've completely lost my thread. All right, I would like to introduce our panelists. We're going to start with a gentleman who just not too long ago returned from the International Space Station, astronaut Kjell Lindgren. Ooh, I have my own microphone. Next up, NASA's lead scientist for Mars exploration, Michael Meyer. NASA JPL Mars mission manager, Jennifer Trosper. And finally, NASA's program executive for solar system exploration, Dave Lavery. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. So we're going to be talking about NASA's journey to Mars. And so, what's it take to get to Mars? We've been talking about that. I mean, everybody's heard it. Everybody knows it's an enormous challenge. So why don't we run down the line and tell me, just in your opinion, what is the most important technology that we need to develop that we have not yet developed in order to take us to Mars? Let's start with Dave.
So there's actually a very large ongoing program within NASA and the larger aerospace community right now developing the whole suite of technologies that we're going to need. And I think every one of us are going to have a slightly different list. But I'm going to look to the blue suit to my left and immediately think probably the thing that we need to work on the most that we are investing a lot in is advanced life support capabilities that actually can survive a multi-year mission out to the surface of another planet and back and return people alive back to Earth.
Nice caveat on the end there.
Well, we're right at the cusp of trying to land larger masses on Mars, and we need to be able to land about 15 tons on Mars. And right now, Curiosity, we were able to land about 1 ton. And so we have some technology work, hypersonic decelerators, cool name, where we get into the top of the atmosphere and we have these inflatables that about Mach 3.5 can slow a vehicle down to Mach 2 so you can deploy a supersonic parachute. And we have a whole bunch of neat technologies to try to get us from landing 1 ton, the Curiosity rover, that's actually the Mars 2020 rover, which looks a lot like the Curiosity rover, up to 15 tons, which we need to get our astronauts on the surface.
Or you could lose some weight, man. I mean...
15 tons, that's a tall order.
So I'm going to echo what Dave said. I think really the biggest critical item for going to Mars and getting back is the length of time it takes to get there and the fact that you're so far away that you have to have a closed system so that you're not leaking all your material into space and having a constant resupply. And so I think that's the biggest challenge of how do you make a completely closed system in which everything is recycled so that you don't have to keep on bringing new stuff with you.
From the perspective of having just returned from the International Space Station and working on that magnificent laboratory that we have there, that really serves as a bridge, I think. We were, bridge builders right now, creating that bridge to Mars. And spending time talking up there about what is it that we're going to need to fly to Mars. I echo a lot of what's already been said, the life support systems, the closed ecology, and trying to reduce that logistical trail as much as possible. It's hard to live in space but it's even harder to go deep into space. If we have an issue on the International Space Station, the astronauts and the cosmonauts can climb into their Soyuz and return quickly to the Earth to evacuate. We're constantly getting cargo vehicles, and those things are going to be very difficult to do for this long mission. Speaking from, I'm a physician, and so speaking from kind of the protection of the soft, squishy bodies inside these beautiful vehicles, protection from radiation, I think, is one of the real barriers that we face right now. We live in low Earth orbit under the protection of the Earth's magnetosphere, and once we pass beyond that, we're going to be exposed to galactic cosmic radiation, which is something that we really haven't dealt with since the Apollo days. And so I think that's a challenge that we're working to address as well. And advanced technologies, engines that that surpass the performance of the chemical rockets that we have right now, that can get us there faster and get us home faster. Those are some of the things that can help us address, reduce that exposure to radiation.
All right. And if I could just offer my own answer to my question, I think one of the most important, radiation would have been my answer, but he took it. So
we should have coordinated.
Yeah. But I do believe, and bear in mind, I'm an enthusiast, not an expert, so I got 4 experts and me. But I feel like we should be developing artificial gravity, centripetal gravity for the astronauts, because I feel like there's just over and over and over again we find new and exciting ways that long-term zero-G habitation is devastating to the human body. And I think it'd be easier to nip it in the bud with artificial gravity than it is to ameliorate every symptom. But that's just my opinion. So now, once again, let's go down the line, and I would like to know people's opinion on what is the best propulsion system or method for getting to Mars. There are a lot of options. One of them is just a direct Hohmann transfer ellipse, with a chemical propellant burn, and that would be an 8.5-month journey to get to Mars, and then over a year on Mars, and then an 8.5-month journey back. And that's a system where it uses the absolute minimum delta V, and that's technology that we have right now, technology that would be monumentally expensive, but technology that we have right now. Another option is to develop better ion engines, as depicted in my book. It's really easy to make up science and engineering accomplishments when you're just a writer. But, how realistic is that? And then finally, another kind of dark horse candidate is to build a cycler, which is something in solar orbit that regularly comes close to Earth and regularly comes close to Mars. So I'm curious what the panelists here think is the best way to get to Mars.
Well, as Andy mentioned, we have the basic technology to get there now. We've done this a couple of times already, but with robotic systems which don't mind the 7.5 to 8.5 month wait for a simple transfer orbit. And so it's really, fortunately, that's one of the technologies where we don't have to answer the question about how do you build a technology to do it. It's now all a matter of how do you build technologies to do it better or more efficiently. Andy outlined already several of the options that are there. The one that I've been sort of very carefully keeping an eye on, Franklin Chang Diaz, who's one of our former astronauts, has been working on Vasimir engines for quite a while now and is a big proponent of that technology, and is a firm believer in what, if it fulfills its promise, would take a 7 to 8 month trip and cut it down to a couple of weeks if it's truly successful. And so that's the sort of thing that we're pursuing. But ultimately, realistically, and since part of our discussion is going to be about the crossover between real science and science fiction, this is a fun one to consider. The ultimate answer to the entire thing really is transporters from Star Trek. And the reality is, they possibly are out there for real, and there's a couple people who are working on basic ideas behind that. So who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, follow that, Jennifer.
Yeah, well, I guess I have to pile on the transporters and just say, yeah, that's the right way to do it. Probably being the person who, goes to work every day and actually does these things from an engineering point of view and figures out how we get from here to there. How do we send robots today, and how do we send people, in 10 or 20 years? I think we have to we incrementally build on on the technologies we have, right? We start with the chemical propulsion. We figure out how to do a mission with that. We figure out how to land more mass. We figure out how to protect the astronauts from radiation. And then we do the next step while we have in parallel the transporters and the ion engines and the other technologies that these folks are going to talk about. But I think it's very incremental. And I think if we can simply get the chemical propulsion system to work and bring people back from Mars, that would be awesome. And then the transporter would be next.
I just feel compelled to point out, Dave, that until the Star Trek movie reboot, transporters only had orbital range. So you'd still need to get them.
Too nearsighted.
Yeah, right. So just saying.
So my preference actually is, to get to Mars, I think the first question is what? And so I think we could use things like solar electric propulsion to get most of our stuff there. And then when everything's set, then you can send the astronauts. And for that, we have chemical propulsion. So my vote is we do what we can do now, because the sooner we get humans to Mars, I think the better.
Well, I feel a little bit at a disadvantage being at like the end of the line of these like three brilliant scientist engineers.
You feel at a disadvantage. I'm at the end of the line of four brilliant scientists. One of them's a freaking astronaut.
Darn it, Andy, I'm a doctor, not a rocket scientist.
You're a doctor and a rocket scientist.
Well, I'm going to join on the hybrid of all of these. I think that, working now to figure out a solution and then taking advantage of future technologies. And I think that's a huge part of what we're doing here today, is to leverage the engineers, the rocket scientists in the audience here, the teachers who are training up the generation of explorers that are going to set foot on Mars, and then the folks that are here from the Hollywood side that are set to inspire folks to get involved in space and to make those engineering breakthroughs so that we can get humans there and back quickly.
Cool. And my own opinion, I'm actually torn between all those methods, except possibly the transporters. Not really sure about that one. But yeah, and so I was genuinely asking to see what people had to say. I mean, in my book, they used ion engines because I needed, for narrative purposes, I needed them to be able to change course. But that was more a decision for like drama than it was for, what's the best way to get to Mars. All right. So for the next question, the big one, the one that everybody asks all the time, the one that you guys have probably heard so much that you're just sick of hearing, let's hear it again. Why send humans to Mars when we could just send a bunch of robots? Dave, take it away.
I'll preface my answer by saying, so my background is robotics, artificial intelligence, and computer science, AI and robotics for my grad school work. And so that's robots have been my career. My reality is...
Our future overlords will worship you.
Well, but the reality is I work on robots because I want people to be there. Robots are wonderful tools to allow us to experience planets in the solar system in ways that we can't yet because we can't yet. They're not a replacement for the human experience. And as soon as we can make the human experience on the surface of another planet real, the better. We do it with robots now because we have to. We have no other choice. But the reality is, as good as these mechanisms are, they never are able to completely allow us to understand an environment through the eyes of a human. Jennifer and I, for example, we've been working together for about 20 years, ever since the Mars Pathfinder mission in Sojourner.
I was 12 when I started.
Right. I was 16. It's okay. And we've both learned through that experience what it's like to explore through, basically, in effect, looking at a world through a soda straw. The eyes of a robot that's several 100 million miles away. And it's effective, and we've been able to do a lot with that, but we both recognize, as well as everyone else, the science team, and Mike and the science community that he works with, for example, that there's still, although we get the numbers and we get the pictures, there's the experience that is missing, the actual understanding at a visceral level of what that place is like as an environment, as a planet, and potentially at some point in the future as a home. And until people go there, we're probably never going to get that.
Yeah, I agree. I have 3 biological children and 5 rover children. So every rover that's been to Mars, I've worked on and built and operated. And so I am a robotics person. But I think of Mars Pathfinder back when I was 12 and Dave and I started working together. And I drove home that night, at the very first night. If you guys remember, it was July 4th. We landed on Mars. It was on CNN. And we didn't know if it was going to work or not. We're like, wow, there's some pictures coming back. And we're looking at these pictures of Mars, of this thing. We just landed on the surface. And I remember driving home in the blue Ford Probe I had at the time. And I had that picture on my steering wheel driving down the 210 freeway. And it was awesome. And I was just like, this is another world that I'm looking at. But it did not parallel at all the moment I personally stood at the edge of the Grand Canyon and took that in myself of what the Grand Canyon looks like. And then I think of Olympus Mons, right? A Grand Canyon on Mars that's as big as the Valles Marineris. It's big as the United States, and standing on the edge of that, that's why I want to send our rovers there. So we got to get landing technologies that can get us closer so we can send the rovers there so I can see what it's going to be like when I get to stand there or my kids get to stand there. And that's why I think we need to send people.
I think maybe you should have been looking at the road instead of the picture.
It's a 210.
It's the 210.
So I'll have to echo what Jennifer said. I've done a lot of field work, and there's nothing that replaces the experience of being in the environment and getting a sense of it so that you could figure out what you really want to do and ask your questions. Working through a rover is so slow. Oh, it's just so slow. But, you have advantages where, the rover can see in wavelengths that you can't see. It can do things that you can't do because you don't have the strength, or look at things at a microscopic scale. But being there is what counts. So that's one reason. The other is we're stuck on this planet. We're one blue dot in the universe. And until we get to another planet, we're forever vulnerable what's happening on this one. And so in the long term, I think we do need to go somewhere else, and Mars is the next best place.
Well, we're explorers. I mean, it is ingrained in our DNA. It's why we climb mountains. It's why we scuba dive. It's why we go to the Grand Canyon. Because, you can get a postcard, and if the postcard sufficed, then why would you ever go to the Grand Canyon? You can take pictures of mountains, but it's being there. It's that experience. And the ability then to share that experience with others and inspire them. I think that's why we need to go to Mars. I've seen pictures of space. I've seen pictures taken from the International Space Station, but going there and experiencing it with my own eyes, experiencing weightlessness and looking out from the cupola down at the Earth and seeing the Earth changing constantly with different weather patterns, with the different lighting, with different seasons of the year, it's almost indescribable. And so that's why, you see so many pictures coming down on Twitter, because we want to share that experience. And it's why we need to go to Mars. We want to put our feet there. We want to stand there and take it in. And we want to be able to bring that experience back and explain it and just in those visceral words that you just cannot get from seeing those vistas through synthetic eyes.
Thank you, and I'm gonna echo Michael's thoughts. My own answer to that question is the purpose of sending humans to Mars is to learn how to send humans to Mars, so that we can eventually colonize it. And that seems like this unattainable dream, and it is pretty much for everyone who's alive today. But at some point in the future, we do need to be a two-planet, or at least two-planet civilization, or we risk extinction. And although it's not a very large chance that all life on Earth would be wiped out, there have been extinction-level events in our geological past, and we have lots of man-made options for wiping ourselves out as well. And as long as the entire human race is on one planet, we have this tiny, tiny chance of extinction. When we're on two, that chance basically drops down to zero. I mean, nearly zero. So that's why I think we should have a stable, self-sustaining human population somewhere other than Earth, and Mars is the best candidate. And for those of you who don't know why, it's because Mars is closest. It is the third closest body to Earth after the Moon and Venus. Venus is hell. It's about 500 degrees Celsius. It has 90 atmospheres of pressure on the surface. The longest a probe has ever survived there is 14 minutes. You don't want to go to Venus. Mars, the moon is awesome, but it's lacking, it has practically no carbon and it has very, very little hydrogen, whereas Mars has all of the building blocks of life in abundance. So if you were to colonize Mars, that population, once it was self-sustaining, would be able to grow without any assistance from the outside. So that's why Mars is the target.
I just want to mention, Andy, that we get to Mars. If we establish a colony on Mars, you're right. We're somewhat protected from extinction, but what it really does is give us breathing room until the sun goes supernova. But that's on the order of billions of years. I think we'd be able to figure out what to do.
I think over 5 billion years, we could probably work out, some technology to ameliorate that.
I want to add to, as we are working towards Mars, being in space and looking down at the Earth, I think also gives us an innate desire to take care of our planet. I think it's a big part of what NASA is doing. Sure, we're looking out to the rest of the solar system, but when you look back on our planet and you see it hanging there in the void of space, I mean, it is a spaceship like the International Space Station. And on a weekly basis, we do maintenance, we do repairs, and we protect this small craft that is protecting us. And I think one of the things that we try to do and that we need to do better is just help people to recognize what a precious spaceship that we currently exist on, and do everything possible to protect it and protect its future as we continue to look outward.
All right, next up, commercial space programs. What do you think is the importance and significance of commercial booster systems like SpaceX and Boeing and other companies are working on to NASA's future to going to Mars?
They let the headquarters guy deal with this one first.
What are we allowed to say?
Yeah, what are we allowed to say this week? The reality is successful commercial space ventures have to survive, have to be successful, and have to flourish in order for NASA to survive and flourish. That's the reality of where we are. It is not our business, and we can't do everything that will be required just to fulfill our own goals of extending our exploration efforts out into the rest of the solar system, extending human presence beyond Earth. We can't do it by ourselves. We need to have the commercial space community must exist for us to utilize to basically take the first steps from surface of Earth up to low Earth orbit and eventually even beyond that. Basically just buying tickets on the bus, and to be crude about it, that we just want to be passengers for that first couple of 100 miles off the surface of Earth so that we can then focus on the stuff beyond that, which is our current charter, to really try to expand human presence out beyond the orbit of the moon. If we're busy just going from the surface of Earth up to low Earth orbit, which we've proven we are able to do, and we can still continue to do that, but the reality is we're not good at that as a business, as a commodity. We're not good at making it affordable and economically reachable. We need to turn that over to the commercial community and let them figure out how to do it reliably, affordably, effectively, and efficiently so that we can use that as the first step so that we can really focus on how do we then get humans from low Earth orbit out to Mars, out to the asteroid belt, and out beyond that. So when people ask, are we in competition with this commercial space community, it's actually exactly the opposite. We are desperate for them to succeed, and the sooner the better.
Yeah, I completely agree. The partnership Dave's talking about is essential for us to make progress. I also would add that I think, NASA can get a little insular, can do business a certain way, and it's very valuable for us to be challenged by the commercial space industry. For somebody who's just taking a look at things from a new perspective, who's turning the problem on its side and saying, we're going to do it this way. And it makes us all better. It makes us better. It makes them better. And so in addition to the partnerships, we actually are trying on the Mars 2020 rover to really partner more with academia, partner more with commercial industry, just so we can have ideas that don't come from inside of NASA. Because if you don't get ideas from outside over time, you aren't as good. And we want to be the best that we can be.
Yeah, I think it's really important because it's the American way. Competition. I mean, that's how you get the innovation. That's how you get the prices into the affordable range. I think all of this has actually done a lot for breathing some new life into the launch systems that we have here.
Well, I think it's absolutely amazing that our country has a commercial sector that is able to do something that only 3 nation states in the history of our world has been able to do. And so we are, looking forward to the successes of the commercial space sector. I personally would love to launch on a Dragon or a Boeing vehicle from Kennedy Space Center to the International Space Station to return that human spaceflight launch capability back to the United States. On the flip side of that, on the International Space Station, we are desperate to share that experience. That's why we tweet pictures or share them on social media. We are desperate to share that experience with friends and family. And so the opportunity for the private sector to start flying non-professional astronauts to share that experience of seeing our world from low Earth orbit, I think is going, that is going to be a milestone and one that starts to kind of really give that new perspective to everyone that's living on this spaceship.
And my own answer. I think that basically this is kind of like the airline industry of the early 20th century. It needs a jump start to get into the real consumer market. And by NASA being a customer with comparatively deep pockets, not compared to other government agencies, but compared to most private, it will provide the money that these commercial industries need to develop the technology to drive the price to LEO down. And eventually, we will reach some magical point. As long as there's competition, as long as there are multiple companies vying for NASA contracts, the price will get driven down and down and down until it reaches this magical point where a middle-class American can afford a trip to space. And when that happens, there will be a space boom, just like the tech boom or the airline boom. It'll be this huge, tremendous, just increase. And with the demand for space travel that'll come at that point, that will generate more companies, generate more technology, drive the price down even further, and then space travel will truly be as routine as commercial air travel. And it's all just a game of economics. You gotta start that fire somehow. And so that's why I'm a big fan of you guys doing that. Which then we got time for one more quick run up here before we open it up to questions from the audience. So recurring slope lineae on Mars, liquid water flowing on the surface of Mars. Very interesting, yes. There is an RSL, something like, I don't know, how far is it from Curiosity? Anyone? 2 kilometers. There's an RSL about 2 kilometers from Curiosity, but we're not sending it there because of the rules of planetary protection. Now, I know I got 4 people who work for NASA, so maybe they can't completely give their free and open opinion on the planetary protection policies, but I'd like to hear what folks have to say. Sorry to put you on the spot. Take it away, Dave.
So I'm going to give you a partial answer intentionally because you've really got 2 questions there, one about planetary protection and one about RSLs. And I'm going to defer all the discussion about slope lineae to Michael, who really amongst us all is probably the expert and can talk about that. But the planetary protection policies are there for a very, very important set of reasons. And for those who are not familiar, planetary protection is exactly what it sounds like. It is about protecting the planet. The only thing that's sort of a caveat on there is which planet are we talking about? And the reality in this case is all of them. Where we have planetary protection procedures that have been put in place, and these are defined by international convention and international treaty in terms of a set of standards and processes that we use to make sure that the things that we send out into the solar system are clean and free of Earth organisms that we might accidentally transfer to another place and intentionally or unintentionally start a colonization process early. And in particular, where you're sending missions out to other planets to look possibly for other signs of life, you want to make sure your spacecraft is very clean and free of any sort of Earth biology, because you don't want to land, have something fall off that you brought with you, have your life detection instrument look out, and the first thing that it sees is the residue from engineer Kyle's sneeze.
Freaking
And so
Kyle.
you really want to make sure you really want to make sure that that is not an issue. So the planetary protection is there to make sure that we follow the processes necessary to ensure that everything truly is clean and free of any material that for either contamination purposes or false positive science purposes, things like that. Planetary protection also is looking at the reverse process, where if we go and we start to get into sample return missions and are bringing materials back from other heavenly bodies, that we don't do anything to accidentally contaminate Earth, should that be a concern. Now, fortunately, so far, that's not been an issue in the samples that we have brought back, but we are, for example, one of the reasons we are going to Mars is to understand its potential as an environment that can support biology. And there is a legitimate open question right now about whether that environment exists today. Did biology ever actually occur on Mars? Did it evolve? Did it persist? Is it still extant? And if it is, we want to make sure that any samples we bring back that may have something in it don't contaminate Earth in any fashion. So there's a whole set of procedures that we go through to make sure that that all takes place. The reality from the engineering standpoint is those procedures are very specific, very precise, and realistically, they are exhaustive and expensive to implement from the engineering side. But we do it because it's necessary, it's appropriate, and it's something that we do being responsible stewards of the biology of this planet.
Yeah, so Dave hit on it generally. I'll talk a little specifically about Mars 2020. You know, we're down selecting our landing sites now, and we have about 8. We have top 8 sites, and part of what we're doing in the planetary protection world is making sure that none of those sites have anything in them that we might be concerned about landing on or near. So we're being good stewards of Mars in the way that we do our site selection, in the way that we're designing the engineering for the arm. We're being good stewards of making sure that we are not getting our dirty rover inside of our pristine cores. The arm actually cores from rocks and regolith on the surface of Mars, and then places those in a clean area inside the dirty rover, so that we can then drop them in a depot for a later mission to come and retrieve them. So Mars 2020 is actually the first mission starting the sample return idea, that we're going to cache these samples, we're going to drop them on the surface, and another rover is going to come back and bring those back to Earth, which is really a step towards getting people back from Mars. So that's very exciting. The planetary protection and contamination control are amongst the hardest and most expensive requirements to implement as you build a rover, and I'll leave it at that.
A couple of things occur to me. One is it'd be a tremendous shame to go to Mars and be discovering different things, and all of a sudden you go, wow, look, you know what? There used to be life on Mars, and we actually killed it last week because Earth life has taken over and basically taken over the niches that Martian life was using. It would be such a tremendous shame to miss that opportunity to screw things up before we learn enough about the red planet to know whether or not it supports life today or supported life in the past. I mean, just as a slight side, all life on Earth is related. You look at the biochemistry, the DNA, RNA, proteins, every single living thing on Earth has the same system. We're basically one organism, just different manifestations. We don't know anything about alien life. Something that could have started in a different way would actually tell us something fundamental about life itself, because it's not related to us, or potentially not related to us. So that's, science-wise, that's just fantastic, and you don't want to screw that up while you're exploring. That's why we have planetary protection as the one half of it, the forward contamination. Now, back to the RSLs. Recurring slope lineae, a very purposefully obtuse name, because we're not positive it's water flowing down a surface. It's hard to explain. The amount of water in the atmospheric column on Mars is 1/10 of a precipitol micron. It's nothing. Where did all this water come from? It's from the subsurface, but how do you get it on the surface and have it flow every year? So number one, the RSL that's been seen in Gale Crater, actually too, it's not confirmed. You see something that looks dark and long, it looks like a streak. You don't know whether or not it's something that fell down the cliff and caused something dark, or whether or not it really is a recurring slope lineae, which means that it'll show up next spring and grow during the summer and then disappear when temperatures cool off. We're not going there because planetary protection says we can't go there. We can't get there. I mean, it's one of those, we'd have to devote several years of mission to try and get to this thing in which we're not even sure quite what it is. But we are going to image it with our cameras, which are excellent, and we'll get a much better idea of what may be going on over a better time frame than what we have been doing so far, is just looking at it from orbit and looking to see whether or not it truly is something that's happening real time or just a one-off event.
I don't have anything to add to what has already been said. I think it's, it reflects on the priorities of NASA, though, that as we explore, that we are taking care to protect the environments that we are exploring, and also trying to protect the Earth. And I think it would be really cool to have the job title of Planetary Protection Officer. So.
Actually, Andy, if I could add just one thing to that as well, that this, we've all mentioned that NASA as an agency is taking fairly significant strides to make sure that we keep Mars clean, in effect. The end of that story is that eventually, when we do have a human mission to Mars, the Planetary Protection Officer at that point in time is going to take a vacation to Aruba and never come back. Because the reality is, as soon as we land people on another planet, all the idea of contamination control and reverse contamination go right out the window. One of the big things we don't have is technology that is sufficient to keep the human body and what it contacts clean enough to satisfy planetary protection standards. So we accept the fact that we're doing a lot right now to make sure our rovers are absolutely pristine and free of biological residue and everything else. But as soon as we put a person on Mars, people are dirty and leaky and covered with crap, and just, you give up on planetary protection at that point.
Filthy humansies.
I'm just taking one step further. It's not necessarily all bets are off as soon as sending humans. You may have to designate an area where humans are allowed to go, because we know that that particular region on Mars is lifeless. And you may preserve other places where you don't send the humans. You may send their robots so that you can explore, so you can practice safe exploration.
All right. With that disturbing analogy, we're done with the panel part. We have a few minutes for Q&A from the audience. We can answer a few questions. All right, right there.
Monsanto is perfectly willing to do genetic research now. What about mixing? I mean, we could wipe ourselves out. Never mind extinction with germs that may come back here.
I think they pretty much addressed that. The planetary protection stuff, and it goes both ways. They're being careful with both, like, us infecting Mars and with the potential for Mars infecting us.
Yeah, the basic rule is that if you bring a sample back from Mars or other designated planetary bodies, it remains in containment until you can prove that it's safe.
When the Apollo astronauts came back from the moon, they were quarantined for, I don't know, a few days at least.
Sort of.
Oh, it was the 60s. These are Apollo astronauts. And so it's like, oh, you're contained, but anyway, here's your martini.
We didn't understand safe exploration back then.
There you go. How about you right there?
What else do you think can the public do to help others, make this a priority or make this an important thing for them?
Well, I mean, the easy answer to that is talk to your Congress people. I mean, make it known that this is a priority, and that's a difficult thing to get that kind of grassroots support for something like space exploration. But we do our best to inspire. We recognize what a privilege it is to be that small group that gets to live and work on that platform. And so we do try and share what it is that we're experiencing, but our reach is somewhat limited. And when you're checking your Twitter feed, people are distracted to the next thing that's on their Twitter feed. So trying to identify a way to sustain interest and generate that grassroots support to make this a priority with all the other competing priorities that our country's leadership have to deal with. It's a difficult thing, and I don't envy that job, but I know that this domain, generates jobs in our country. It inspires kids to get involved in science and technology and engineering and those areas of education that are going to be critical to our future leadership, not just in technology, but leadership as a country in this world.
I'll just jump in and say, I also think that a lot of it does have to do with the entertainment industry. And we're in the middle right now of sort of a virtuous cycle of the entertainment industry and the space program, which is that there is a resurging public interest in the space program, which drives the entertainment industry to make movies that show sort of a realistic, pseudo-realistic view of what real space exploration is, like The Martian and Gravity, and to a lesser extent Interstellar. That's a little more wild sci-fi, but those three movies have been a good example of the reason those movies were made is because the studios figured, oh, we can make money off of this because people are interested in this right now, which causes more people to be interested in the space program, which causes NASA to hopefully get more funding, which in turn causes NASA to do cool things, which causes more people to be interested in the space program, which causes more entertainment, and so on. So it's a very nice virtuous cycle. So, from my opinion, what you need to do is continue to watch my movie and buy my book. And just generally, support the entertainment industry. What I do like is just to give you a feeling of scale is like the box office receipts from The Martian. It would be is enough to fund 3 Pathfinder missions. So, yeah.
We'll take it.
Oh, you'll take it?
Sold.
Talk to Fox. I'm sure they'd be happy to just cut you a check. Yeah.
I also think, just to add, I spend a fair amount of time doing outreach in schools, and I really think that STEM and getting our youngsters involved in engineering at a young age and knowing that it's cool and building a generation of kids who want to be astronauts, of kids who want to go to Mars, of kids who want to go to the nearest star, building that generation, because that's the generation that's going to do it. And as much as we can through movies, through books, through being there, through helping them build something and see that this is really fun and cool, I think that's what we should be doing.
Oh, there you go. All right, we have time for one more question. You there yep.
Your point about seeing Mars through a soda straw was really interesting from our standpoint. I'm just curious how much you could talk about how you're exploring the worlds of being able to take people to places and using the advanced technology of the cameras and sensors to open that soda straw.
So interesting you should ask that question. So one of the projects that NASA's working on right now that, excuse me, that I've been involved with for a while, and this is all public now, so it's no longer proprietary. One of many different partnerships that we've had between NASA and the commercial community is one recently that we've been working on with Microsoft, and they've got a new device called a HoloLens, and if you're working on VR, you know what it is. This is it's a wearable computer. A lot of people look at it and think it's a really cool headset, but it's actually is a full-blown computing system you just happen to wear on your head. But amongst other things, it has the capability of full immersive virtual reality as well as augmented reality and all sorts of other stuff. Our virtual reality team here at JPL saw that coming and immediately said, this is something that we can use to make a difference in how we explore planets. And we've actually taken that device, worked with Microsoft to develop a whole new process for actually controlling the rovers, for having the science team explore another planet, basically by allowing the rovers to collect enough information, enough imagery as it drives to allow us to build a virtual model of the surface of Mars so that the standard interface of a scientist or engineer, rather than looking at a flat panel display of the latest pictures that came down last night, and then trying to mentally sort of wrap them around and figure out this rock in this picture relative to the rover, is it over here or over there or over there? Instead, we build a virtual environment and let them walk around inside it to understand what that context is really like. And make the next logical leap of saying, rather than having a bunch of text-driven commands to tell the rover, drive forward, extend your arm, put the instrument on this rock, instead you, in the environment, you walk over to the rock, you point to it and say, put the APXS here. And it back solves how to do that and turns that into rover commands. That's what we're doing operationally within the rover teams. As soon as we started to get into this, and it wasn't a big logical leap, we said, you know, I bet the public would be kind of interested in this stuff too. You know, we're government employees. It takes us a while to make those leaps. But as soon as we recognized that, one of the immediate fallouts was we said, we can make a publicly distributable version of this. We'll strip out all the stuff that allows you to command the rover. I'm sorry, we're not going to let you do that. But after removing that part, the part about displaying the surface of Mars so that as the images come down from the rover each morning, and we take about an hour to build a virtual environment and populate that virtual environment out to all the science community members, we'll also release it publicly. So if you happen to have one of these devices, and there'll be other ones later on that'll be added to it, if you're sitting in your armchair in a farmhouse in Iowa and you want to know what does the surface of Mars look like right now from the viewpoint of the rover, we're going to let you find out, and we're going to show you in the same level of detail that we use scientifically. So yeah, we're trying to open up that big soda straw that we look through as much as we possibly can. It's going to get better. We're going to get more realistic environments built. And I say all that, and there's a lot of excitement because this stuff is coming like not in 10 years. This is like this year. This is all going to be happening. But the reality is, as cool as that's going to be, I still want to be there in person. I want to see my own footprints on Mars one day.
All right, well, that's great, and that's all the time we have. So now, thank you, panelists.